they seemed to see something in their time that everyone else missed when it came to the birth of Jesus Christ. And when I enter into a new year, I have a lot of different things going on inside of me in that week between Christmas and New Year's. You have the busyness, and then you have some family time. This year, I had a lot of time to think about it because right after our Christmas party, we jumped in the car and we drove to Prague, which is 9 or 10 hours away, and we joined a couple of other families from here, and we all attended a reception for Anastasia, who just got married and wanted to have something nice about her wedding for her European friends and family. And it was beautiful to contemplate the new year with a new family who had been married and are optimistic about starting a family and entering into the new challenges of a world and a new home where they're going to be living in the UK. But as I was driving on that long drive back through some snow in Germany and spending good quality time in the car is the best quality time you can have with your family because it tests your character and all sorts of things like that. But while they were all sleeping and I was driving, I was thinking about the things we all think about when the new year comes. For me, it's a new start. Maybe there's some new goals I want to have. I always set a New Year's resolution that I generally fail at by this mid-February, somewhere around there. What is I want to learn? Where do I need to grow? How do I become better? How do I pursue God's calling in my life? And like you, I'm sure there's other things that go through my mind. There's reflection of the past year and the things that we've been a part of, or maybe even childhood memories of time spent with family during this time of year. And as I get older, I tend to think more of my own family, my kids who are getting older and are almost adults now. I think of Madison, who's 25 and in Chicago. And we talked to her over the week, and she's talking about her boyfriend, and they sound like they're getting ready to possibly get married and these kinds of things. And she's got great career ahead of her, opportunities, and just wonderful to hear what God's doing in her life. And then I think of Catherine, who flew to Prague, and we got to spend the last week with her. She'll go home tomorrow. And just how she's standing on her own 2 feet. She's gotten a job, and she's got her own place to live. She's putting herself through school. We're very proud of her. And even Allison, who's struggled over the last couple of years, she's got into an online school program now, and she's optimistic and trying to find her way. The kids are doing well. We have a lot to be blessed with. Amy has a new project that she's working on at the university that'll keep us here for at least another few years, and that's a very good thing for her. And I even thought over my life, the things that we're involved in at the church here and in Leuven, and how God is continuing to bless us. The activities and doors that God's opened for me in Ukraine and through church planting networks across Europe. It's a privilege to be a part of all those things. But also, like many of you, all things are not easy and great. We look back and remember some struggles that are there. I think of my parents who are getting older, pushing 80, and health problems, and on a decline every time we go back. It seems like they're getting older. And I visit my aunts and uncles, and I think of one in particular. Is this going to be the last year that we have them with us? One has a really bad heart problem, and the other Parkinson's. What about my cousin who's got a 44-year-old husband, and they aren't in the faith, and we're praying for their faith, whose husband has ALS and is now declining and in hospice and going through a difficult time? How do you walk through a new year facing these types of things? Or my childhood friend who recently reached out, and his wife has an aggressive form of cancer and is finding it hard to find hope in the future. You see, when you enter into a new year, it's easy to talk about all the good things, but we've got these other weights that carry us down, and they seem to snuff the hopes out. But there's a tension in all of us. The same is true in the church life. Christoph made this great little graphic that I stole off of Facebook on blessings for 2025, and we can build off of the last year. It's interesting to think that just a couple of short years ago, we were just coming out of COVID. And we had spent 2 years only meeting online and not being able to reach out to the community. And how we see now many new faces that are coming back into the church. And we have this great core group of people here at ICEL that have all stepped up to make our church into a growing, thriving place. Over the last year, we've celebrated together new births. We had testimonies of people. We had a baptism this summer with an incredible testimony from a young man who came from being an atheist to God just revealing himself to him. We've celebrated by dedicating children. We've seen, like Anastasia getting married, people, God blessing their lives, prayers being answered. If you don't attend the Thursday night prayer meeting, you should pop in there once in a while. It's amazing to me how many prayers get answered through that group. But we've also seen challenges in our church. People struggling with health, children with depression and anxiety problems and struggling just to get through school, families that are broken, people losing family members as we have in the last week, and the difficulty of that, some of the things that only the grace of God can manage. But we put our arms together, we journey together, and we point to God. So what are we as a church looking for in 2025? But what about the world? As I was looking at this the other day, I was looking at news reports. I do this during this time of the year, and I found a French report that said the most impacting news reports of 2024 globally from some French outlet. And it was interesting to me the things that they pointed out. They talked about the fall of Assad in Syria and the vacuum of power that it leaves, volatile wars in the Middle East and Ukraine, martial law that was temporarily instituted in South Korea and the fragility of global governments, terrorist attacks and things related to elections around the world that leaves the world a volatile place, the death of Alexei Navalny, pointing out some of the corruption in the world governments, the things that we tend to put our trust in. All sorts of news articles about artificial intelligence and the potential dangers that represents for people, and the list would go on these different things. And I began to think, man, if that's the most impactful news, that's a pretty bleak way to look at 2025. So what is it we're looking for in the world to solve some of these justice issues, these problems in 2025? Oh, guys, it's doing that thing. As we go to Matthew, Max, can you take care of that? If we go to Matthew 2 and we look at the story at hand, the story of the three wise men, I don't think things in humanity were that different back then overall than it is today. Institutions were broken. Our circumstances are different. We have a lot more. We have lights and computers that don't sometimes work on Sunday and things like that. But I think the brokenness in humanity was the same. Institutions, the kingdoms of man were the same as they are today, somewhat corrupt and inefficient to meet the needs of the world. But what was it that they were looking for, the wise men? They were looking for an answer. In studying the cultures around them, is there an answer to solve the problems of the injustices of the world? Where do I put my hope? Where do I put my faith? Where do I put my allegiance so that we can have a better tomorrow? And it seems that the three wise men found something that everyone else in the world did not. It's a season of the church when we talk about this called Epiphany. And Epiphany is an interesting word. If you looked it up in a Webster's dictionary, an English dictionary, it says it's an intuitive grasp of reality through something such as an event that's usually simple and striking. It's an interesting description of the coming Christ child. This goes on in the dictionary to say it's an illuminating discovery, realization, or disclosure. The epiphany that they had was that this child was the hope for the future. They had studied and they had said, what if this ancient Hebrew text, what if these prophecies were really true? Could there be another way to get rid of the suffering and the pain and the hurt in the world? And these first two verses give us sort of a framework as we see the story. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem, and they asked, "Where is the one who's been born King of the Jews? We saw this star when it rose, and I've come to worship him." Now, realize what's happening here. The place is Bethlehem in Judea, the place where it was prophesied Jesus would be born. They go into Jerusalem, which isn't very far away. They go into God's chosen people, the Jewish people, and they just begin asking the people, where's the baby? They're excited. The people are not. And the question that they asked, they said, where is this King of the Jews? And realize they're only quoting Jeremiah 23. In verse 5 of Jeremiah 23, it says, "The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will rise up for David a righteous branch, a king who will reign wisely and do what is just and right in the land." They're like, we want to find this. We believe he's here. They're excited. They're finding hope. They're saying, what's going on? And they said, we even saw the star, referencing Numbers 24, where it says a star is going to come out of Jacob. So they ask God's people, they ask the people that are there, and Herod gets upset. They're saying, what do you mean there's a king of the Jews? See, because that's a title that the Roman government had put on him. And see, he had an interesting job, because he had to kind of keep things in order for the Roman kingdom, right? They had to make sure that all of this Jewish people were good Roman people at that time. And it must have been a strange question from outsiders. Why did these foreigners know what to look for? Why weren't those in the religious establishment and those in power seeing the same things? You see, it's a reflection of their hearts. They were seeking truth and hope with everything, and they were hoping these Old Testament prophecies were true, and a new reality was coming in the form of a new king, something that would turn everything upside down and make it new. And all they wanted to do, it says, is find him and worship him. But what was this response? And here we begin to see in these couple of verses a real contrast between the character of an earthly king and the king that Jesus would become, the heavenly king. This idea of Jesus, compare and contrast Jesus with Herod. Herod was known for his power and ruling with an iron fist. He was also a shrewd politician. He had a reputation to go for him. It was his way or the highway. There was no other way around it. He ruled with power in mind. But Jesus' power originated in love. One commentary says it originated in love, it's shown in vulnerability, and he entered the kingdom through the cross. Jesus came to usher in an entirely different kind of kingdom, and I find it extraordinarily interesting that Herod was inaugurated as king when he was 33 years old, which is the same age Jesus was nailed to the cross, died, and was resurrected 3 days later to usher in this new kingdom. So how did Herod and the people respond? Verse 3 says, when Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him. When he called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was born. So how did he respond? He said, I got to put out this skirmish that's happening here. They're asking questions. It's going to rise up and create a problem. On top of that, who's this other king that's being born that's going to threaten my existence? And I find the answer very interesting that comes from the religious establishment. They knew. They were knowledgeable of what was happening. In fact, they answered very quickly, well, the Messiah, he's going to be born in Bethlehem here in Judea. For this is what is written in the book of Micah. In Micah 5, it says, but you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. You see, the experts had an immediate answer. They knew the scriptures. They knew the passages, yet they did nothing. They didn't see the signs. They didn't see everything that was all around them. One commentator remarked about this. He said, this apathy, this disconnectedness from reality, their apathy hardened into outright opposition to Jesus. as his ministry developed and ended with frenzied lust for his blood, an incredible warning that knowledge is no substitute for obedience. Think about that in today's world. We're living in an information age. We have stuff coming at us 24/7, not just news, but information. Anything we can get it on our phone very quickly. How difficult is it for us today to not get lost in all of the information and not see what God is doing around us? Information and knowledge and obedience, getting it into our heart and allowing transformation to happen, are not the same things. Perhaps the institutions of the time, the academic elites, the religious elites, perhaps they were comfortable under Herod's powerful rule. They had given them power. Perhaps they were blinded by the kingdom of man, which Jesus would go on to preach. But let's go on in the story. What did Herod do? He becomes the consummate politician, right? Keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer. I've got to learn more about this enemy. I've got to learn more about what this is. I've got to figure out, I'm going to lose my position and power if this gets out of hand in the Jewish community. So what does he do? He calls the Magi secretly out and he asks them, what's going on? When did you see this star? When did all of this happen? He gets the entire story. Then he says, oh, I'm like you. I'm interested. I want to meet this person. I want to see who he is. Why don't you go to Bethlehem? I talked to my experts. You go find him. And then I want to go worship him too. It's the double-tongued lying of a politician who's seeking to only assert his own power, because we know later that he really was going to try to kill this king that was going to be born, that was born. He probably was going to kill the Magi. Some theologians, if you read about this, it's super interesting. They believe that there's evidence that he may have told the chief priests and all of them that he had asked for their advice on this to not say anything, to keep this all a very quiet secret, just to keep everything down so he could quietly snuff out this problem. So the Magi, they leave. And what does it say they do? After they heard the king, they went on their way. And the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. Now think about this for a minute. They had traveled a long ways to come to Jerusalem to see this king that God's people should have known and been looking for, and they weren't. They enter this chaotic scene in Jerusalem where nobody seems to know what they're talking about. They get brought in front of the king, who says, hey, let's keep this little secret. Go find the king. They're probably thinking, what is going on here? This is complete chaos. They leave there dazed and confused. And when they head in the direction of Bethlehem, which is only a few kilometers away, God begins to communicate them in the way that he had already been communicating with them. You see, these wise men, these astronomers, they saw the world through the stars. They believed that the stars reflected the things that were going to happen on earth. And God pointed them through their language to where Jesus was, because they were seeking hope for a new world that he was giving in the form of the Son. And when we are communicating with God and we enter into a chaotic situation and we enter back into God's presence and see him leading and guide us, it brings us to a place of joy and clarity. And I believe this is what the Magi experienced. And then finally they arrive at this humble home, not in a palace, a humble setting in Bethlehem. And what did they do? They saw Mary. I'm sure they said, Mary, we finally found you. They were probably even more overjoyed. But they gave an appropriate response. They bowed down and they worshiped him. They had finally found what they were looking for. They weren't thinking about the politics of Herod or the weird situation in Jerusalem. They were simply saying, we had sought out truth and hope, and here we found it. They didn't question the settings or the circumstances. They were confident in the knowledge that they had from the prophecies and the affirmations that they had had from God. There was no question who this child was to him, and they worshiped him. Then they opened up in their whole caravan of people, they opened up their treasures, and they presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. A direct fulfillment of prophecy from Isaiah 60, where it says, herds of camel will cover your land, young camels of Midian and Ephah, and all from Sheba will come, bearing golden incense and proclaiming the praise of the Lord. Now I want you to think about this. These people had traveled 11 to 1,200 miles. That's more than 1,700 kilometers in their journey. Some believe that the journey may have lasted as long as 2 years on the idea that a child might be born that could bring hope to the world. You see, their epiphany was that the one who was going to change everything was here. And they literally went to the ends of the earth to say, I have to find out who this is and if it is true. And a look at the gifts that they gave them give us a little insight into who these magi saw the baby Jesus as. The first gift is a gift of gold. It's a gift appropriate for a king. Jesus came to become the perfect king, and his kingship would reign for eternity. The second gift was myrrh, indication of a prophet, but not just any prophet, one that would fulfill the prophecies of all of the Old Testament. Myrrh was also an incense that was used for burial, because in his ministry he would overcome death for mankind. Frankincense was something that was used in the temple. Jesus would become the ultimate priest, making final reconciliation between God and mankind. The perfect king, the perfect prophet, the perfect priest, all rolled up in one. God, his Son coming down, something no man could do completely on our own, doing for mankind what man could not do for himself, which is bring us back into favor with our Father in heaven. Begin the process of bringing us back to what creation was intended. The three gifts signify who he is, what he came to do, and what it would cost him. The Magi, these outsiders, the Gentiles, they understood this. Herod and the religious experts did not. They were too blinded by their position and their power. They missed the beauty of everything that was happening in front of them because of the chaos of trying to protect the status quo. But the Magi saw who he was. And what happened with him? People that seek God and they find him. God protects those that seek after him. They didn't go back to Herod. And I suspect after meeting Jesus, they probably maybe forgot, but God gave them a vision, said, don't go back to Herod. It's not a good idea. They took another way home. You see, they had spent time in the presence of God. They had followed all of the signs to Jesus, and they sat at his feet, and they worshiped him. They gave him the best of what they had, and they went home with a new outlook in life, knowing that the God who created the universe had communicated with them and said, out of this child is going to come hope. So what do we learn from all of this? See, the Magi sought Jesus with all their heart, and they weren't deterred by anything. They traveled a great distance. They didn't put their own cultural preconceptions in. Well, what if this God of the Jewish people, what if he was the one that had all the answers? And they sought out that truth with all their heart and all their mouth, and they found it. And it's the heart that we need to have as we enter into a new year. There's going to be more chaos. There's going to be more news. There's going to be more people holding on to power and position and title. There's going to be more interpersonal conflict. But we can't let that get in the way of our pursuit for Jesus. We're going to close today in a minute by going into a time of communion, but I want us to consider these three questions while we're considering the elements a little bit later. They're questions that can help us give perspective on the new year. Where are you searching for hope and security? Is it in whether or not the Belgian government will form in the coming days? Is it whether or not in my country, whether Donald Trump is going to build or destroy the world? No. We can't put our hope in these temporal governments. We're subject to them. We live in them. We have to participate in them. But our ultimate hope is in Jesus. What about all the social issues? What about homelessness, the justice issues, the things that plague the societies, the wars, the atrocities that are happening around the world? Every one of them, if you put Jesus at the middle, provides an answer. So in the midst of all the information on all these horrible things coming our way, we have to discern what is our role in all of that and where is Jesus in all of that. Our hope and security will be found there. Then we'll know how to participate in the governments and institutions that God has placed us in. How do you respond to uncertainty and to the unexpected? As I get older, I've thought this would get easier as you get older, but the truth of the matter is, as family and complexities change and you get older, this actually gets harder, I think. I can walk through a lot of things, but there are certain things that catch me off guard. And if I've done that to one of you, I apologize. But the reality, it means I've got work in my life and you've got work in your life. How do you respond to the unexpected? Because probably if you're not having a good response, you're not looking for Jesus in the situation. And that leads us to the third one. What do you do when you find Jesus? The religious establishment, when Jesus was born, knew all the prophecies. But they were completely clueless of what the Magi were talking about when they came. They didn't see the signs. They didn't see the wonders. They were too caught up in all the arguing of their time. What are the things that we're involved with? That, yes, we know Jesus, we have experienced Him in our life, and you can have a true and authentic faith. But what are the things of the world that are getting us distracted from looking at Him first before we look at the things that we're engaged with? Where are you searching for hope? How do you respond to uncertainty? And what do you do when you find Jesus? I pray that every day you would wake up and you'd find Jesus in the moment and worship Him.